Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of First Samuel, and today we are at chapter 17, starting from verse 1. This is now right after the time where Samuel had anointed David, and and God had left Saul by himself. He's getting into what we call an evil disposition. He needed David to play the lyre or the harp or a stringed instrument, and that would pacify him and help him breathe again. Now, that was where we left off in chapter 16. Now, moving on to chapter 17 is actually a different scenario. We're now told that the Philistines, these are their perennial enemies all through the book of Judges. And then when we started the book of First Samuel, right on the onset in chapter 3 and 4, we are beginning to see how the Philistines will come and disrupt their lives, impose on them, subjugate them, and do many things against them. Now the Philistines is now taking this opportunity to challenge the whole of Israel in bringing them into full subjugation voluntarily. So now the Philistines, they are gathering. The word gather is to collect together. This is to collect together their armies. Now, when we talk about the armies, this word doesn't really mean army. Uh, the word here really means a camp, right? A camp of, well, I guess you can say that it's a camp of people, but in this case, it's a camp of soldiers. So the phrase here is not just merely soldiers, but the focus is really on camp, which means that they've come together, they have encamped, and they are getting ready for battle. The idea of battle is to engage in, well, I guess in the old days, in the ancient warfare. Now we are told that they are gathering or they are collecting together in a particular place. Now, in this particular place, it's called Soko. Uh, we don't really know exactly where all these places are, but it's called Soko and it belongs to Judah. And by this, we can read that the Philistines have entered into the confines of Judah, Judah's territory. So once you have armies or the soldiers encamping into your territory, that's a signal for battle. And we are told that they are camped between Soko and Azekah. It is in the area of Ephes Damim. Now, all of these are names which we don't know exactly where they are, but we know that they are in Judah territory outside of the territories of the Philistines. Verse 2 gives us a little bit more detail. Saul and the men of Israel. We are told they are called men of Israel. And remember, men of Israel for battle are the 20-year-old and above. We read of this in the book of Exodus chapter 12, and then in the book of Numbers chapter 1, they begin to count, as well as in the book of Numbers chapter 26. Now, we are told that Saul, the king of Israel, notice he is still the king of Israel. There is no replacement yet, even though God says, I don't want you to be king. God did not uh, somehow remove his life. God allowed him to continue. But God says, since I don't want you to be king, I'm not going to be drawing near you anymore. You will not have my presence, and you cannot and engage with me. You cannot inquire of me. I won't even listen to your prayers. And Samuel would disappear from view. Now, Saul and the men of Israel, they were collecting together and they camped in the valley um, of Elah. That's the name of this place. And this word drew up literally means they arranged themselves. They arranged themselves for battle to encounter the Philistines. Now, I guess the word encounter uh, is to meet them in battle, right? To meet them. And this would be with regards to battle. We need to read verse 3 so that we have the entire picture. Verse 3 tells us this. The Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, while Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. There is a valley called Elah. And so what we see is this. On the one side is on this side, and on the other side is also on this side. It seems that when we come to verse 3, we are reading this from the viewpoint of an observer. As an observer, let's say this is the observer, we would have two sets of hills. And so this is what we mean, that on this side, we have the Philistines. And on this side, we have Israel. And so what we have in the middle would be the valley of Elah. And so the text is actually telling us that this side and this side. So we are having a vantage point, and this is how verse 3 is describing the picture. Now, verse 4 is when it gets a little bit more interesting. Now, it says here, and it came out from the camp of the Philistines. The word armies is camp. And this word here, champion. This literally tells us that there is how would we say, a man who, can we say is a champion? Let's say, yes, we can. We can say it this way. The text actually uses two words. A man who is the champion. So this is a man of the champion. The champion in this case, I think we can take, we can understand that between two, right? Between two, one of them is a victor. And so this word here, a champion, means between two armies that fight, one becomes the stronger one. And he came out of the camp of the Philistines, and then he was called Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Now, this is where it gets a bit more interesting. First, the word Goliath. In the Hebrew, it is, well, let me just explain to you. In the Hebrew, it's Goliath, right? Goliath. It's spelled this way. Goliath. Now, how did we get Goliath right here? Now, much of our Hebrew names in the Bible actually comes from Greek. Uh, and this name, Goliath, comes from this word. And this is spelled as Go Li At. All right. And this is where we get the name Goliath. And it is, as you can see, it is a Greek name. It's a Greek name. So Goliath here is a Greek name. The Hebrew name is Goliath. Now, just for our interest, let me explain to you how did we get from Goliath to Goliath or Goliath in the Greek? Is that you find that you have the Gol, and that is a Gol. The I is from the letter A, the letter Y. The reason being is that in Greek, there is no Y sound. There is an I sound. And so the translators who translated the Hebrew into Greek had to use the I sound. And of course, the final three letters would be the at, right? These are two letters. And these are the two letters. The at sound is available in the Greek. So it becomes Goliath or Goliath in the American spelling, right? American pronunciation. But the real name is Goliath. And so this is for our interest, so that you know that many of the words that we read in the Bible are actually Greek names. For example, Genesis is also a Greek name. And the Hebrew name is Bereshit. And so this would be something that you should be aware of by now. And so he is from Gath, that's his hometown, and his height. Now, this is an important aspect. The height is the focus of this sentence. Was 6 cubits and a span. Now, what is interesting is that there has been a lot of discussion lately that the LXX, which is the Greek Old Testament, as well as the DSS, the Dead Sea Scrolls, both say that this height wasn't 6 cubits, it was 4 cubits. And that is a big difference. And let me just explain to you now that we are on this topic, uh, how do we view this? Okay, first of all, a cubit is approximately 17 to 20 inches. And let's say if it was 17 inches. Now, what is a cubit? A cubit is an arm. This is how we measure the cubit. From here to the tip of your fingers, this is a cubit. And this is approximately 17 to 20 inches. And let's take 17 inches for our calculation. If it was 4 cubits, this would be approximately 5.5 feet, right? 5 feet 6 inches plus a span. A span would be the hand, and it would be the distance between the thumb and the last finger, and this would be a span, right? A span. Uh, a span. Yeah, we can consider that a span. Some would consider a span from here to here. But nevertheless, this is approximately 4 inches to 6 inches, right? And so you can add another, say, 4 inches, and it's approximately close to 6 feet. Uh, if you had 6 cubits and a span, this would be approximately 8 feet 6 inches plus another 4 inches, and you get approximately 9 feet. If the focus of the statement is on the height, then I would submit to you that having a height close to our height today is not very tall, not outstanding. And so I am inclined to follow the 6 cubits and a span to be correct, because we are also told that in Second Samuel chapter 21, and you can go back and read that there are mention of Goliath's relatives, and they are also big and tall. So Goliath cannot be average height. That's all I'm submitting to you. He cannot be average height. And with this, I don't think the Greek text and the Dead Sea Scrolls it does justice to the focus of the description of a champion, somebody who wins their battles of the Philistines, and somebody who would be, I would think that 1 Samuel 17:4 would talk about somebody who is outstanding, somebody who would be heads and shoulders above everybody else. And thereby, when we read the rest of the verses in chapter 17, that the Israelites are terrified of him. Now, you would not be terrified of a person who is about your same height. And thereby, I would think that 6 cubits and a span would be correct. Now, he is dressed up. He has a bronze helmet. Now, I think the word bronze is more of a modern day. A copper would be a better word, I would think, right? More of a copper helmet on his head. And he was dressed up with a scale armor, which weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze. Now, this is a uh, heavy armor. Scale armor would be a dress, okay? Maybe it's long sleeves. And this would be in a scale form, and that it would be little plates like this. And if you have seen the terracotta warriors, now that would be very similar. The terracotta warriors might be wearing jade, if I'm not mistaken, but in this case, maybe in the medieval times, where their armor, the dress that Goliath is wearing is metal scales. That's what it's trying to explain. And it weighs 5,000 shekels. A shekel is approximately 11.5 grams, right? 11.5 grams. So 5,000 shekels. 5,000 shekels times 11.5 grams gives you approximately 55,000 odd, right? 55,000 odd grams, which is about 55 to 60 kilos. Now, this is fairly heavy. right? Fairly heavy, about 57, 58 kilos. And that would be the weight of the armor. That makes a lot more sense. Now, our next part that is being described in verse 6 is that he had bronze greaves on his legs. This word bronze greaves, and it's not a word that we are familiar with. Um, you can actually say that this would be the leg armor, right? The leg armor, which means that if this is your foot, the leg armor is supposed to cover this part here. Now that is an armor on his leg, and so people can't hit his leg. That would be the weaker side. Next, he has a bronze javelin uh, slung between his shoulders. Now, understand that first of all, it's not bronze, and we could always refer to this as copper. This would be I would say this would be this is a short uh, dart, meaning a shorter spear between his shoulders. So he's wearing it. He's wearing it at the back, right? At the back, like that. It's not long. It's supposed to be a short one. That's why it's called a dart. But the dart doesn't mean our dart board game. This would be probably about a third the length of a long spear, right? About that. Verse 7, the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the head of his spear weighs 600 shekels of iron. And thereby you find that this would be fairly big. His shield carrier also walked before him. Now, the shaft of his spear, this is a very interesting expression in verse 7. This word shaft actually comes from the word tree or log. And so it denotes something long and wooden. So the shaft of his spear, and this spear really would be something that is long and sharp, was like a weaver's beam. So this would be really a long version of a dart, and it's like a weaver's beam, uh, as though you were going to weave, right? And the head of the spear, this would be the tip right here. Let me just give it some color. This part here, the tip, the head of the spear, we are told that it is 600 shekels times 11.5 grams. And this will give you something like about 6 to 8 kilos. Now that is big. That is a big spear. And his shield carrier. Now, this word, the shield carrier, means the one who is lifting his shield. Which means that if Goliath is here, then there is a shield carrier who is likely to be smaller than Goliath, and he'll be carrying the shield in front. And Goliath would have leg shields and shafts. So this is how we are now told from a observer, an eyewitness view of Goliath. And so he is well and ready for battle. Now, I guess we can imagine now as we read this text that Goliath should be tall. He's got a helmet. He has his entire attire, and he is well protected, right? Well protected. About 9 feet, give and take, right? 9 feet, which means that when he stands up, he would be heads and shoulders above the rest of the people. And hence, we see him as a champion of the Philistines. Now we understand the threat of Goliath. In verse 8, we're now told as the narrative moves forward, he stood. So as he is standing up, he is standing up. And when he stands up, it makes a difference, which means that if this was Goliath, the rest would be smaller than him. So it tells us that Goliath should be heads and shoulders above everyone else. And with this, he would be more daunting and more intimidating. And then he shouted loudly to the ranks of Israel. The ranks of Israel means these are the battle lines. These are the ones who are in battle. They are in rows, right? Right here on this side of the hill. And he calls out to them. Now, when he says calls out to them, this would be a mocking. That is as best as we can see. The mocking comes this way. Listen to what he says. Why do you come out to arrange yourself in battle array? Why are you arranging yourself in battle? Am I not the Philistine? Now, this is the definite article. The Philistine. Whenever you have in Hebrew the definite article, it actually refers to someone or something specific. For example, the land. We are always told that would be the promised land. The Philistine is the particular, the one that the speaker and the audience knows well. Who would this be? Am I not the Philistine? Means the champion Philistine who's standing there. And you, servants of Saul. And so the taunt is from Goliath to the servants of Saul. And so in this case, we should be fighting. You servants, in this case, would be the ones who serve Saul, and hence the servants or the soldiers would listen to Saul to go into battle. So he says now, choose a man. Now, this seems to appear to say, select yourself a man and let him come down to me. Understand, if you recall just now, we had the hills, right? We had the hills, and the battle would be in the valley. And hereby we have Goliath, big guy, and calling to the army of Israel right here to send someone out to fight. Send someone out to fight. Come down from the hill and come out and fight with him. So Goliath is actually standing out there. You can just imagine that would be the modern day ring, and there's nobody else there except Goliath. And the challenge would be, verse 9, if he's able to fight with me. The idea of fighting here is to do battle. Do battle. engage in battle with me, uh, and with me would be together with. So we are now seeing that in the Hebrew, it's a one-on-one fight. And then this word kill is to slay. Then we will become your servants. This is the offer. We will become your servants. But if I prevail, which means that if I am able, if I am able to kill him, which is the same word that's being used here, the meaning is implied. If I'm able to against him and then kill him, and then you shall become our servants, and then you serve us. Literally listen to what we say and do as we say. So this whole idea that if he's able to stand against him and kill him, then the whole battle will be over. That's the whole intent of Goliath. Verse 10. Again, the Philistines say, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. The Philistine is Goliath. So notice this word, the Philistine, not just anyone, but the Philistine. And then he says, I defy you. I am taunting you. I am saying that you can't do this. I am taunting the ranks of Israel. You are waiting there to fight me. So give me a man, any man, that we may fight together. And so this is a challenge of a one-on-one, each representing each side, and whoever wins and kills the other. So it is a fight to the finish. Now, how did the Israelites react? The Israelites had a different picture altogether. Now, we are actually standing in between the Philistines and the Israelites, and we are hearing this commotion. When Saul and all Israel, now understand this particular phrase, all Israel refers to the 12 tribes, right? The 12 tribes. When they heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now understand, this is an A and a B. The first word, dismayed, right? Dismayed is be broken. They were shattered. Their morale was broken down, right? They were greatly afraid. They were terrified. Both words mean the same or very similar. And so Israel, as is described in verse 11, is terrified of the Philistine. And we know who the Philistine is. Now, this is the picture that we are left with as daunting to the Israelites. I guess I wanted us to understand and appreciate that there is no way that there is anyone in the ranks of Israel who would step down to fight the Philistines. The Philistine Goliath has to be tall and big. Otherwise, nobody is afraid of a 5'10" person. Right? We have basketballers that in our times that is in the 7 feet arena, and when you see a person who is 7 feet, he is tall. But 5 feet 10, that's nothing. You can't even join the basketball team. And so I'm suggesting that the text is very clear to show the height of the Philistines. And now we are getting the reaction of Saul and all Israel being terrified of this man. And so I am willing to submit that this man, Goliath, is adamantly tall and threatening, and nobody dares to face him. Now, the story and the narrative switches gear. It's like the camera now pans to a different story, a side story to speak about David. In verse 12, we are now told again, as we now know from chapter 16, David was the son of the Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah. Uh, and and this is another word. We've seen this word before, Ephrathite. We have seen it in 1 Samuel chapter 1, in verse 1 of Elkanah. And one of the meanings of an Ephrathite is somebody who is a noble, a prince, right? Uh, Wealthy. Yeah, that would be a good expression. And so Jesse is an Ephrathite. So was Elkanah. Not that he is from Ephraim. He is of Judah. He's living in Bethlehem. It's called an Ephrathite. And thereby giving us a picture that he is someone who is wealthy, like an Ephraimite in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 1. Now, who else is an Ephrathite? Boaz, right? Boaz in the book of Ruth. Now, he had 8 sons. And we read in chapter 16 that 7 sons were passed by the face of Samuel. And then finally, reluctantly, they brought David in, and David was anointed. At this point in time, Jesse was old in the days of Saul, advanced years among the men. He is an elder. Remember what is an elder? Somebody who is old, right? He said old means elder. Was an elder in the days of Saul. Now in verse 13, another piece of information has come to us. The 3 older sons of Jesse had gone after Saul to the battle. They went to the battle. The names of his 3 sons who went to battle were Eliab, the firstborn, Avi, Nadav, the second, and third is Shammah. So we have first, second, and third sons going there. Verse 14, David was the youngest. David was the insignificant. Or you could also say the smallest in stature compared to the brother. And so if we are now considering going to battle, the word insignificant, unimportant, smallest are all good words to use. And David wasn't quite the youngest, right? David was the more insignificant of the family, and he might have been the smallest in stature. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David, that's the background story. David was with Saul. After all, he was playing the harp for Saul. And now we're told in verse 15, he went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's flock at Bethlehem. So what we are told is this. We have Saul, and then we have David, who plays the harp And then he goes back and forth to tend the sheep, right? Who tends the sheep in the wilderness. And so what we see is at this particular point in time, it so happened that David was back tending sheep and Saul went to battle. Now the story turns back to the conversation between Jesse and David. Now, another piece of information is the Philistines came forward morning, evening for 40 days and took his stand. The Philistine is Goliath. And this happened for 40 days. 40 days is also a testing period. It is generally seen as a number to test them, right? A number to test them. It was long in duration, and they were taunted for 40 days and night because he came forward in the early. Now, this word here is morning. Actually, doesn't quite mean morning. He came forward early, rising early, or at the time where man was rising, early rising. And then evening, literally when it was growing dark. And so now you can see that the Hebrew words is very imagery, that Goliath would come up when everyone is starting to wake up, and Goliath would go back when the sun sets, when it grows dark. I think we can take a break here so that we can continue tomorrow with the continuation of the conversation between Jesse and David, and it moves forward to the battle between David and Goliath. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.